Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everybody. Saying good morning from Costa Rica. Um, Today, I'm talking to you from Costa Rica. I'm from Chile. I'm extremely proud to be part of this community who has come together to help those in need in Puerto Rico. Kudos to the organization, and I think that together we can make it. Uh, we are all teachers, or we have some experience in the classroom, and I think most of us agree that teaching a language, in our case as ELT teachers, is much more than teaching words and teaching vocabulary and teaching structures. I believe that we as teachers plant seeds in our students that we cannot always see sprout and bloom. I think that the seeds that we plant sometimes sprout a month, a year, 5 years, 10 years into the future. So, the topic that I will talk to you about today, that I wanted to share with you, has to do with empathy. And I believe empathy is one of those seeds that we can plant. Why talk about empathy? Well, Parker Palmer would say that you teach who you are. And in my case, this is no exception. I'm very interested in empathy because I have noticed that in my own life story, in my own career as an educator, and as a professional who has contact with a lot of people, um, empathy is one of the elements, one of the skills that makes a big difference in people's happiness. So I grew very interested in empathy and how I can help my students practice it. I don't want my students just to tolerate others as they become global citizens. I don't want them to just put up with other people. I want them to be able to connect to other people's realities, and I want them to be curious about other people's realities. And of course, that's not done overnight. Of course, I'm not the only person that's going to have an impact on that on my students, but I can contribute with a little grain of salt. Um, and the landscape of consciousness sounds even a little bit mystical. And I think that I will explain what I mean by this through an example. I think I will explain the elements, and I'm sure they will come together. If you look at this picture, and I asked you to create a story in your mind of what's going on here, what would you say? How would you describe it, and what's happening? What's the story behind? Chances are you describe what you see in the picture, you describe the place, maybe some of the colors, some of the actions that you can interpret. But chances are too that if you're a kid and you're around 8 or 9 years old, you might have described also some of the feelings of this character, some of the things that they are thinking. Jerome Bruner, a US American psychologist, more than 135 years ago, said that a good story, any story, creates two landscapes: a landscape of action. So there we have the protagonists, the location, the time, the colors, um, and of course the action that happens. And then the landscape of consciousness, which is what the characters know, feel, or they know, feel, or know, or what they don't know, what they don't feel, and what they don't think. So when you're constructing a story, these two come to play. Even when you are telling your significant other about your day, when you're narrating an anecdote, I feel we tell stories all the time. And in order to be able to construct a landscape of consciousness, you need empathy. In order to imagine what a character or another person was feeling or thinking, you need empathy because you need to put yourself in their shoes. You need to grab and recall your previous experience. So if you see this picture, for example, a picture of a kid falling in the sand, you can think just that, that's a kid falling in the sand. probably you will find other words and other ideas that come to your mind. Maybe the kid fell because mom said don't go and play on the beach and he fell. Maybe you're saying he's just so happy that he just fell back and it's super excited and he has never seen the ocean before. If you start thinking all of those extra elements that you cannot get just from the picture, you are painting a landscape of consciousness. And I believe that's an amazing way to help our students build their empathy skills or try to put themselves in other people's shoes. So I wanted to share with you a couple of things that I have done in the classroom that I believe help practice this little by little. One of them is I sometimes present a little story. I don't know if you know those comics that have like 4 vignettes or 4 squares. They're like very simple stories, sort of like Calvin and Hobbes or Charlie Brown or Mafalda. And so I'm working with those with my students, and I just ask them at some point, at any point in the story, how do you think this character is feeling? Especially if there's no speech bubbles, if they have no linguistic clues, I ask them, how do you think this character is feeling in this moment? And beginner students will be able to tell me just the feeling. More advanced students will be able to tell me more about their guesses. And then another activity that I do is the same when you have a short story, especially with pictures. I have noticed that pictures work really well. They tell me why they believe a character did something at some point in the story, especially if they haven't seen the ending, if they don't know the whole story, if they just see one picture, like the picture of the boy just now. Why do you believe the person is doing what they are doing, or why do you believe this character took this action? And that also helps them put themselves into the character's place and exercise empathy. The third one that I have done, and this one I love a lot, is to tell my students to create an alternative ending for a story and how that affects the different characters. Again, when I talk about this, it can be about literature and long books and long texts, but I normally, to make it more accessible and more appealing to the whole population of students that I have, I normally use short stories of just a couple of vignettes. And they imagine another ending. They come up with the funniest things, and some of them get very creative. And the point to me is always go back to what the characters are feeling and how that ending affected the characters. And sometimes if there is a conflict in the story, I invite them to resolve the conflict in a different way. Resolve a conflict in a way that doesn't affect the villain, for example, or that we can achieve an ending that's productive for both sides, and then how that affects both sides. So these are some of the activities that I have done to raise empathy in my classroom. I would like to invite you to think of the ones that maybe you have done unconsciously without having that intention, that helps students put themselves in another person's shoes. I want to thank you for the time you have given me. And I have my final slide. I definitely wanted to take a little bit shorter for my presentation and just remind everybody to go online, follow the bit.ly, go to the GoFundMe, and donate, because it's very, very important. And again, congratulations to the organization. Super proud and very, very honored to be a part of this.